Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Doing good? All right. Well, I'll tell you what, it's good to be back. For those of you who don't know, I had total knee replacement 2.5 weeks ago, and shout out to all my fellow senior citizens out there. Solidarity, because I'll tell you what, this surgery is no joke. It's been hard. So I had surgery, like I said, 2.5 weeks ago. I was up in Madison, and so I spent the night at the hospital, and then the next day we were coming home, and as we were driving home, my muscles were cramping in my leg and my knee seized up, and I couldn't get out of the car. And so when I finally got out of the car, I literally was sitting in the garage, and my wife, Andrea, she helped me, and I just burst into tears. Now, don't judge me, by the way. I know some of you are like, pansy, but don't judge me. I've had 4 knee surgeries. I've never cried because of pain before, except probably when I was a baby in my life. So it shocked me. It shocked my wife. We didn't know what to do. And she was like, what do I do? What do I do? Well, she got me inside. She got me to bed. And here's how I know my wife loves me. She raced out in that moment and bought me a lazy boy because she knew I would need something to have my feet up. So that's a good wife right there. Absolutely. Now, she immediately regretted that decision because as soon as I got in the lazy boy, I said to her, you know this is never leaving the living room, right? And she doesn't like the look of a lazy boy. She wants one of them fancy living rooms, Pinteresty living rooms. But I was like, this thing ain't going anywhere because what a lazy boy is for a man is a throne. That's what it is. It's for a man to be the king of the castle. And so it got me thinking, what are some other famous examples of thrones? So I happened to Google it, and here's a picture of some famous thrones throughout the world. So this first picture to my right, your left, the top picture is the silver throne in Sweden. It's made of silver. The one to the right is the marble throne in India. The bottom, my right, your left, this is the sun throne in Iran. And that dude, I don't know who that dude is, but he's just rocking that throne out right there. And then this is the dragon throne in China. And these are beautiful, opulent thrones. Now, when some of you, though, when you think of your throne, maybe you don't think lazy boy, maybe you think porcelain throne. And so if you're going to upgrade your bathroom, maybe you need to take it to the next level. And this is what you need to do in your next remodel. And by the way, this is if somebody does this, they have way too much money. So do not do this. I do not recommend this. But when you think about the beauty of thrones that human minds can come up with, all of the jewels and the crystals and the fine materials that we use to make these thrones, it got me thinking, can you imagine what Jesus' throne actually looks like? I mean, the Bible tells us that he is the King of Kings and he is the Lord of Lords, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. So that's got to mean that his throne has got to be beyond our comprehension. Maybe it's made of a material we've never seen before, or it's made of so much gold that the light of God as it reflects off of it simply blinds us. Last week, Tyler, he kicked off this Christmas series that we're in, and we're looking at the 3 presents that were given to Jesus by the Magi in Matthew chapter 2, and how these 3 presents point to his presence in our life. And last week, Tyler, he did such a good job. He talked about frankincense, but that present took a little explanation. This week's present doesn't take a lot of explanation because it's gold. And gold was a gift that was meant for a king. And so let me ask you a question as we get started today. It's just a question for reflection. Is Jesus your king? You see, the Magi, they believe that Jesus is king. Kanye declared Jesus is king, but what says you? Do you believe that Jesus is king, or is someone or something else your king? Now you may say, whoa. Pump the brakes, man. Maybe you're still hopped up on too many pain meds from your knee surgery, but last I checked, I'm not worshiping or bowing down to anybody. I'm the king of my castle. You should come to my house. You should see my lazy boy. I'm my own king. Here's the problem with that, is if we're honest with ourselves, is that we as people still require and crave things outside of ourselves to make us whole. We require and crave things outside of ourselves to make us fulfilled. Things that make us secure or known or loved or valued. So we may think we're our own kings or our own queens. I can do it on my own. I have all the power in the world. Yet, we will often find ourselves looking beyond our own throne and bowing to others in search of something we hope will give us what we're ultimately looking for, to meet a need that we can't meet within ourselves. And so maybe we bow to a relationship because we think if we just have the perfect relationship, that's what I need to complete me. Or maybe it's money. I need as much money as I can get because money is what's going to make me secure. Or maybe it's a fit body. I just got to look the part and have the perfect picture on Instagram, and that's what's going to give me worth and for people to think I'm special. Or maybe it's success. If I just have so much success, that's what's going to give me purpose and meaning in life. So here's a good question for you to reflect on. Maybe a question to ask yourself to see what your king is. What do you require to feel happy, secure, or fulfilled? What do you require? What is that thing? Now, before you feel too bad about realizing that, yes, maybe there are some things that we bow down to in life that maybe we're not too proud of. Maybe we do have some kings that we don't like to declare, but you have to understand something. This is actually human nature. We all crave these things, thus we all have kings. There are simply things that we as people need, things that we were designed to have that we can't get on our own. And so what we're going to do with the remainder of our time is we're going to look at a story. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 8, and this story shows us that God, and ultimately, because God made it so, Jesus were meant to be the king of our hearts. Because ultimately, that is where we find the source of life. And it's when we choose any other king over the one true king that this is the beginning of the beginning of heartbreak in our story. This is usually where the train begins to go off the rails, when we allow other kings to sit in the place of the one true king. So 1 Samuel chapter 8, let me give you a little background before we dive into the text. The nation of Israel at this time, they were governed by a guy by the name of Samuel. Samuel was a prophet and a judge. The entire book of Judges talks about rulers in a kind of in a sense over the nation of Israel, but they weren't rulers like a king. Think more like sages or protectors or guides. And Samuel was the last of the judges, and he was also a prophet, which means he spoke on behalf of God. He was not the king of Israel. He was just somebody trying to protect them and guide them and point them back to what was their king, God. Because at this point, Israel had never, up until this point in history, ever had a king. God was their king, and they were ruled and governed by him. But now time has gone by. Samuel's beginning to get old, and as he's beginning to get old, his sons, they kind of step up to help him out. The problem with this is his sons were a bunch of misfits. You know, when the boss in the family business kind of hires his kid to come alongside him, and everybody knows they didn't deserve it, and they're like, this kid, this person's a moron. That's kind of what's happening here. And so all the leaders of Israel, they get together and they have a little bit of a powwow. So let's dive into the text, verse 4. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old and your sons do not follow your ways." Thank you. It's like, well, just let's be blunt here. They're just coming right out with it. "Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." So let's pause here and think about Israel as a nation here for a second. They were the only nation in the history of the world that had the one true, living, breathing God as their king. No other nation could make that boast before or after. They're the only nation in this world that had God as their king. And God as their king, he fought for them, he guided them, he defended them. He was a benevolent king. He is a good king. And yet, they still rejected him. And as a matter of fact, this happened over and over and over again for centuries. And we see it right here. Yet again, Israel is now coming to Samuel and they're demanding what other nations have. We want to be like everyone else. Give us what the other nations have. And Samuel's got to be thinking, this is absolutely crazy. Let me get this straight, guys. You want to trade in God for a dude. You want to trade in God for a man. This is like going to a car dealership, having a brand new Lamborghini and trading it in for a rusted out Prius. No one should drive a Prius anyways, let alone trading a Lambo for a Prius. You just wouldn't do that. And so this begs the question, why? Why were they rejecting God? But once again, this is human nature. This points back to human nature. Human nature is such that we would rather bow to kings we can touch and see rather than to the one that we cannot. And what this is showing is a lack of faith and trust in God, because what Israel figured is if we can put our hands on a king, if we can see our king, then we can control the king. We can get the king to do what we want the king to do. And that's why God says to Samuel, it's not you they're rejecting, it's me. They're turning their back on me. And in the same way, if we're honest, isn't this something that many of us tend to do? You see, we feel like we have to have our hands on our life, be in control of every aspect of our life. And because of that, because we've got to be in control, that means we ultimately have a hard time trusting in a God we can't see. And so we'll reject him for the things that are right in front of us simply because we want to be like everyone else. We want to fit in. So we chase after the things of this world. I don't know if anyone's ever been rock climbing or rappelling before. It's something I've done a couple of times. It's always an interesting process as you get started with this. You got to smash your feet into them little ballet shoes. And I'm like, can we not think of a better shoe? Your toe is like touching your heel. They're extremely uncomfortable. You got the weird harness thing and all of that. And so then you start off. And actually, even though I don't like heights, going up wasn't that bad because you're kind of focused on what's in front of you and you climb up. But it's coming down that gets really hard, because you have to rely on someone else to help you get off the wall. And so I had a friend who's belaying me. That's the guy who's standing below with the rope, the safety harness. And he simply told me, he said, hey, let go and trust me. And so you literally have to fall off the wall and trust someone you can't see. And they're behind you. You can't see them. And this is absolutely scary. And so I remember as I was like, okay, just fall off the wall. He's like, yeah, just fall off the wall. So I kind of try to fall off the wall, but I really won't let go of the wall. Well, all of a sudden he started belaying me, but because I kept grasping at the wall, it put me into a death spiral. And so now I'm bouncing off the wall. I'm concussed. I'm getting bruised up and cut. All because I had to have my hands on the situation. All because I was still trying to be in control. And so he finally yelled at me. He said, stop resisting me. Let go. Gregg, I got you. Well, what would your life and your faith journey look like if you stopped resisting God and finally let go? That you trusted and believed that he's got you. And I get it. It would be a lot easier to let go and trust God if we had a binding contract of how he would behave in certain situations. Like, hey, I'll do my part, but God, you got to do your part. So God, it says right here in the contract that I'll tell you what, I'm going to listen to 2 K-Loves this week. Let's not get crazy. I'm going to do more than 2, but I'll listen to 2 K-Loves. I'm going to serve Sunday at church, so I'll do that for you. And I'm going to be nice to Carl at work. I'll tell you what, no one likes Carl. Nobody's nice to Carl. Carl's a moron, but I will do it. I'll take one for the team, God, and I will be nice to Carl. I'll do that. But if I do that, I do my part. It says right here in the contract, you got to pay my bills. Because God, it says that we wrote it down. We agreed to this. But if we could hold God to a contract, isn't that our way then of still trying to control him? And what kind of God would he be if we could control him? You see, a God that we can control is just a God that we made in our own image, which makes him a fake God or an idol. And the God you control, a God you can control, they can't do more for you than what you could already do for yourself. And I think we've already established that self can't help itself as much as we'd like it to. I mean, guys, I just hobbled out here on a cane. A week ago, I was in a walker. We are degenerative assets. Babies start with walkers, and when you get old, you end with the walker. We're all breaking down over time. That's just what's happening. We're not as good or as strong as we'd like to think we are. What we need is a real, living God, one with power, one that can save, not only save us and give us power for today, but hope and power for our tomorrow, that provides that security that we're ultimately all looking for. But here's the truth about our faith journey, is if you want to be in control, God will let you. He'll let you have control of your life. God didn't create us to be slaves or puppets. He created us to be his children, but what the prodigal son story teaches us is that we as his children can run away from him if we want to, and he'll let us do that. And so what does God do when Israel asks for a king? Well, look at verse 9. Let's jump back into the story. This is God speaking now. He says, now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. And so what God is saying is, Samuel, we're going to give them what they're asking for. It's fine. If they want to reject me, they don't want me, that's fine. But they better be careful what they're asking for. And so he's like, let's give them a warning, because here's what God knows. When you make something a king in your life, a king can only do one thing: rule over you. Verse 11, this verse 11 through 17, I kind of edited it down for time, but this is God speaking. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage, the best of your cattle and donkeys. He will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves." Notice there is one thing that a king does: take. Take your kids, take your food, take your land, take your pets. He's taking everything. He'll take it all until you are a slave. But Israel didn't listen to this warning. They demanded a king anyways. And the irony here is remarkable, because they want a king that will secure them and prosper them. But what they got instead were kings that would take from them. They want a king that will make them free, but instead the king enslaved them. And here's the reality for all of us: is if you choose to have a king over God, once again, like I said, he will let you, but you may have to deal then with the consequences of those kings trying to rule your life, or of those kings trying to enslave you. And you say, "Gregg, I don't understand what you're talking about. What do you mean?" Well, think of it this way. If you make having a relationship king, then you will become a slave to relationships, because if you don't have one, you're going to be miserable being alone. You will find yourself settling for the wrong person or dating some idiot because you're afraid of losing them, which is taking away your self-worth. You'll become codependent on other people or someone, which is going to take your identity, because you don't know who you are apart from a relationship, so you become a slave to relationships. If you make success a king in your life, then you become a slave to success. You're going to overwork or miss time with family and friends, which is going to take moments or take memories away from you. You're going to be jealous and resentful of those who are seemingly more successful than you, so it's going to take your joy from you or take your ability to be a good friend. You may even start to cut corners or take advantage of others to get what you want or where you want, which takes your integrity from you. And then, maybe you got some success, but you're a shell of who God made you to be. If you make money your king, you become a slave to money. So you get into debt to have more and more, which takes away your financial freedom. Or maybe then, because more and more never ends, you're worried you don't have enough, which is going to take your security away from you. You can't be a giving person, even though you know kind of conceptually that it's better to give than to receive, that the people who are generous are those who are most fulfilled. But yet the love of money takes away your ability to be generous. And I think you get the pattern here. Whatever you make king, a king can only do one thing: rule over you. It will take from you and ultimately enslave you. And I want you to notice something about those things I highlighted: relationships, success, money. Notice that these things aren't bad in and of themselves. These are actually good things. These are things that we all want. They are only bad when they sit on the throne of your heart, because they are taking a seat that they were never meant to have, because God made it so that Jesus is king, and Jesus is the one who is meant to sit on the throne of your heart. And when Jesus is king of your heart, you have to know this: he is the only king that does not want to take from you. Now, depending on your context, depending on how you were raised, depending on your background, depending on what church you grew up in, you hear about Jesus and you think all he wants to do is take from you. You think he wants to rob you of life. You think that he wants to steal something from you, or he wants to punish you, or that it's going to cost you. But that's how somebody else maybe has misrepresented him to you. Maybe that's what somebody else said about him. But if you think that Jesus wants to take from you, what that shows is that you don't personally know him very well, or you don't know what he said. And so we need to take Jesus at his word. We need to look at what Jesus said. And so here's what Jesus said. John 10:10, the words of Christ: "The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy." So Jesus is saying that there's a real enemy out there whose job is to get you to chase after earthly kings. And if he can get you to chase after earthly kings, to put other things on the throne of your heart, he will rob life from you. He will steal, kill, and destroy. But look at what Jesus wants to do instead. My purpose is to, keyword here, give them a rich and satisfying life, because Jesus is a giver, not a taker. He came to give you a life both here and up there that you could never get on your own. And so look at what Israel got when they asked for a king. They actually got exactly what they asked for, because if you look at the history of the entire Old Testament, they had a little over 40 rulers in that history as rulers and kings. I believe there was one queen. And of those 40, only 10 of them were decent, and decent's an operative term there. It's not good odds, by the way, if you're a sports bettor. 10 out of 40, 25%. It's not very good odds. And of those 10, only a few of them were good. And then once again, you look at the story and the history of the Old Testament, these kings ultimately led Israel to heartbreak, ruin, and exile. And so by the time that Jesus is born, Israel is now under the rule of Rome, which means they're enslaved. The warning that God gave them came true. They're not even a nation anymore. But the key to all of this is that Jesus was born. But because he came to make right all that is wrong. And so we see in the Old Testament that he is the one who is prophesied about as the one who would come as the King of all kings, that he would come to be our peace, our Savior, our salvation, our hope. And this is why the Magi showed up with the gift of gold. They had heard the prophecy. They had studied the stars. They believed the news. They believed that Jesus is King. And as you look at Matthew chapter 2, the story of the Magi, as they begin searching for Jesus, they actually show up on the doorstep of a king at the time by the name of King Herod. And you'd say, whoa, I thought Israel wasn't a nation at this time. They were under the rule of Rome. Who's King Herod? Well, King Herod was a patsy king, is what he was. He was a proxy king. Rome was ruling Judea. They allowed a king to kind of govern the land just for them to have some semblance of a people. But King Herod, he's also a bad guy, because when the Magi show up and he hears the news of the one true king being born, he thinks, I've got to stop this at all costs, and he begins a mass genocide on babies, because he has to stop Jesus, because if Jesus is king, that means he is not. Oh, but you can't stop Jesus. You can't stop him. Jesus in a diaper is still stronger than any king that's ever lived. And so he couldn't stop him. Now, as you look at the life of Herod, there's lots of bad things that could be said about Herod. This is not a good guy. He did a lot of bad things, but there is one thing we can learn from him. At least he took Jesus seriously as a king. He took him seriously, which is more than what many people can say when they hear about Jesus and just simply disregard him. So it goes back to the question that I started with. Is Jesus your king? Is Jesus your king? But for Jesus to be your king, there is a caveat to all of this. Jesus doesn't want to be a part of your life. He wants to be the point of your life. He was made to sit on the throne of your heart. But for him to take that seat, do you know what that means? You have to be willing to let go. You have to be willing to surrender. But I can assure you of this. If you make Jesus your king, you won't want to bow to anyone or anything else other than him, because he gives life and he satisfies unlike any other thing, so you won't crave any other king, because he is the source of life. Now, last week, if you were here, was baptism. I'm so proud of all the people who got baptized. There were 43 people that got baptized, by far the most we've ever baptized here. Yeah, give it up for them. And I got to watch the baptisms. I watched all 3 services online, and here's just a picture of the people getting baptized. And when you look at this picture, what you are actually seeing is a picture of someone who's decided to let go. That's what it is. That's what baptism is. It's a picture of someone who's decided to make Jesus the point. It doesn't make them perfect. It doesn't mean that life is perfect. But what it does mean is that they know the King. And when you know the King, you now have the one thing that is everything. It's the one thing that humans have spent gobs of money and time and energy searching for to provide value and hope and security. It is found in one place. Jesus is the source of everything. And that happens when you know the King. And that's why I love baptism, is because what you can see in this moment is that you can see it on their face that they know Jesus, that something in their story has changed. And so simply today, my prayer for you, it's simple. I pray that you know him. Not what your parents said about him, not what church says about him, not what you grew up believing about him, but that you know the King. Because when you know the King, it changes everything. Let me pray for you. God, I don't know all the stories in this room or what brought people here today. There's people here who are maybe learning and hearing about this for the first time, and there's people in this room who have followed you for a long time. But I pray that we would take you, Jesus, at your word, that you came to give life and life to the fullest. But that means we've got to be willing to surrender and let go of the things that are holding us back from you, and to let you take your place where you belong, enthroned in our heart. And so as people here wrestle with their story or their context or what they believe, let them see that you are good and that you want to have a personal relationship with them, and that you came to be a giver, not a taker. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.